Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to sunny, beautiful UMass Boston campus. I am going to begin the event a few minutes early, and the reason is because I do want to get our provost out of here by 12:30 because he does have a very important pre-meeting today. But I also have a lot of things to say, and I want to make sure that I get through them. I want to, contextualize and, center this very important event. As I am speaking, I don't mind if you continue to self-serve your lunch. Continue to go up and down. I don't mind if you continue to network a little bit. I just want you to be transfixed in your seat when our keynotes, begin, because they're the reason that we are here. I just want to open up the event. My name is Kiki Idozi, and I'm chairing the Robert C. Wood Visiting Professor Committee this year. It's really an honor to do so, following in the footsteps of the late Robert L. Turner, who passed away almost 3 years ago now on July 27th, 2021. For his obituary, former Dean David Cash wrote that Bob was dedicated to public service and policy, social justice, and economic development that was fair and equitable. I agree with David. Bob was a real gift to us and everyone he worked with. We miss him. May his dear soul rest in peace. All the same, the annual Robert C. Wood Visiting Professor in Public and Urban Affairs Lecture has been a flagship program for the McCormick School and for UMass Boston for 26 years. Through a generous endowment to the school, the late Robert Wood and his widow, Peggy Wood, established the Robert C. Wood Visiting Professorship in 1998, conceiving it as a vehicle for engaging timely topics such as race, education, and government accountability, and linking them to the scholarly and applied pursuits of the McCormick School with policy challenges facing the wider society. I chair the program this year with an excellent committee who I'd like to acknowledge. Peggy Wood is Bob's widow, is right here with us. Franny Wood is Bob's daughter. Franny Wood. Long-standing McCormick School supporter and advocate, Marcy Merningham. I saw her earlier. Merningham is right there. She chaired the committee last year as well. McCormick professors, Michael Johnson and Mehir Latif, right here in the back there. Thank you. Krista Kelleher, representing our centers and institutes at the McCormick School. And Krista is here. And Amrith Fernandez Prabhu, representing our student body as a PhD student in public policy. Amrith, thank you so much. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome this year's participants, sponsors, and organizers. Of course, Joe Berger, Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. Pratima Prasad is the Interim Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. Adunia Lemmy is the Interim Director of the McCormick Graduate School. The Honorable Kim Janey, welcome to our campus. And she is the 2024 Robert C. Wood Visiting Professor in Public Affairs and Urban Affairs. Lou Finfer is here, community organizer, and Carolyn Crockett is on her way. They are the co-chairs of the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative. Professors Nick Jurovich and Lorna Rivera, who are our panel co-moderators. Thank you so much. Andrew Elder is the Director of Archives at Healy Library. Andrew, thank you. Andrew is here, right there at the back. And Olivia Dannenberg, Labor Studies Junior and recipient of the inaugural Robert C. Wood Student Internship Award, will be here in a minute, but please give her a round of applause too. This year's program will distinguish itself from previous ones in expanding the lecture format to a luncheon forum, hosting the lecture and other activities, including a panel discussion and an inaugural student award ceremony. However, it is this year's theme for the Wood Lecture that distinguishes the event the most. June 21, 2024 will mark, as you know, the 50th anniversary of Judge Arthur Garrity's ruling in Morgan versus Hennigan, a case that brought the national struggle for civil rights to the streets of the city of Boston. We dedicate this event in honor of our patron, the late Robert C. Wood, who, like other keynote guests, that we have invited to participate in today's event, was uniquely engaged with the desegregation struggles himself. Bob Wood was an avid public servant, and Richard Freeland, the former president of Northeastern University from 1996 to 2006, aptly described Robert Wood as epitomizing the engaged academic through a career that connected the worlds of scholarship, politics, and public policy. He positively impacted our lives at UMass Boston. From 1970 to 1977, Robert C. Wood served as president of the University of Massachusetts, where during his 10 years president, Bob inspired the creation of the College of Public and Community Service here at UMass Boston, presenting it as an experiment in higher public urban education. He was also critical to founding the McCormick Institute, which is the predecessor of the McCormick Graduate School. More importantly, though, Bob Wood was an impactful, positive force for the desegregation struggle himself. Judge Garrity named Wood to head the citywide coordinating council, a 42-person group charged with overseeing the desegregation of the Boston public schools. Wood's work on the CCC helped him to become the superintendent of Boston Public Schools in 1978, where he made substantial progress in the historic efforts to achieve the goals of desegregation in the Commonwealth. So today's program is a tribute to Bob's legacy in public service education in Boston. So let's jump to the present and to today's program, which we have titled 50 Years of Desegregation in Boston Schools, Today's Challenges, Legacies, and Opportunities. We will revisit cherished histories and reflect on continuing contemporary challenges. Questions that we contemplate are, did desegregation actually occur? To the extent that it did it lead to creating a fairer educational system for African American and other children of color? Was busing the right policy tool? What is the legacy of desegregation on educational outcomes in today's school system in Boston? How are we to understand educational equity in Boston schools today? How might we consider how we integrate the history of desegregation into our educational programs and curricula? And how are we building ethnic and racial cross-cutting coalitions to advance the educational equity movement? In addition to acknowledging the late Bob Wood's own actor-centric involvement in this history, several of our keynotes also have rich subject histories connected to the events. At 11 years old, our keynote speaker, the Honorable Kim Janey, was on the front lines of the battle to desegregate the city schools, facing rocks and racial slurs personally during Boston's tumultuous busing era in the 1970s as she was bused from, I think it was Roxbury to Charlestown. Lou Finfer, who is today co-chair of the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative, was a Dorchester community organizer during the period, bringing together especially black and white communities in dialogue around misunderstandings about busing. Carolyn Crockett, who is on her way, was also first chief of equity of the city of Boston, appointed by former Mayor Marty Walsh. She tackled the hard and demanding work that was needed to address systematic racism in the city. She's now an MIT professor, and even though she was just born the year before federal judge Arthur Garrity ordered the Boston public schools to desegregate, her grandmother joined in the lawsuit because she felt that even the separate but unequal schools back in West Virginia served black students better. Nick Juravich is a labor studies and history assistant professor here at UMass Boston and is teaching a course that centers the history of the event for student learning. Lorna Rivera was a Mayor Walsh appointee to the Boston School Committee, the governing body of the Boston Public Schools in 2019. She continues to work with talented and gifted students and school programs that serve Latinx bilingual students in the Boston Public Schools. And we are also collaborating today with the BDBI, the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative. This is an initiative that involves dozens of state and city leaders, community activists, educators, and people who lived the experience. BDBI has partnered with the Boston Public Schools, Boston Public Library, Massachusetts Historical Society, Embrace Boston, the Archives at Northeastern, the City of Boston, Facing History, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and UMass Boston to bring events like this to students and residents of Boston. These events will serve to educate the city on one of the most impactful periods of Boston's history, in addition to giving opportunities to voice what is needed now to improve Boston and its schools. And finally, Andrew Elder is with us. He is the Healy Library Director of Archives with the BDBI. Andrew has a display at the back, it's a representative of a set of replicas of some of the digitized materials from the Judge Garrity papers. The sections in the collection, and I really encourage you to visit the table. We have the Citywide Coordinating Council Observer Reports, lots of really interesting reports there. We have letters, politicians, letters and speeches. We have correspondences from citizens not directly involved in the case, and we have Linda Lawrence's scrapbook. Linda Lawrence was a student in the 1970s at Hyde Park High School during the tumultuous period, and now she is a professor at UMass Boston. So finally, in honor of the late Robert C. Wood's distinguished leadership and dedication to K through 12 and higher education, especially here at UMass, the Robert C. Wood Internship Award has been established to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Garrity's 1974 decision. The 2024 awardee will intern with the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative. Peggy Wood, Bob's widow, and an active member on the Wood Committee will present the award at the end of today's ceremony. So at the McCormick Graduate School, we prepare to students to advocate for the public interest. Through this award and in tribute to Bob's legacy, we will extend our educational mission to undergraduate students and UMass. So let me close so that I can usher in the rest of the program and especially invite the provost up to provide additional welcome remarks. I promise you an enjoyable and intellectually inspiring and informative 3 hours of programming. Let me just read a few words about the provost before, he's a very important person and has a distinguished career. I have 3 pages here, but I'm going to read just a little bit. That's good. He's being modest. But Joseph Berger is, he's a social scientist, he's an educationist, and he's an academic. He is a professor of education, and he is the provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs here at UMass Boston. He's a renowned and award-winning scholar whose work focuses on higher education policy, organization, and leadership, the impact of higher education on key stakeholders, and the development of higher education in various national contexts. I am just going to say he's internationally has provided leadership for projects in countries all over the world. My favorite, Malawi, but in China, in Russia, in Palestine, in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Dr. Berger has served on several global higher education and research initiatives, including worldwide universities networks. We are honored that you will give us comments today, Joe, so please come up and provide them.
Thank you, Kiki. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, and I want to start by especially thanking the Wood family, and particularly Peggy and Franny, for once again being here with us today. And Maggie, I know, is off providing national leadership for us today with a very important vote. So the Wood family is an important part of the UMass Boston family, and without your support, we could not host such an important lecture series that so aptly honors Robert C. Wood and the spirit in which he conducted his career and his work that aligns so ideally with the values and the mission of UMass Boston. So today we're here, and this lecture series is really important because UMass Boston is right here in the great city of Boston, the capital of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, an educational center for the U.S. Public education was created in Boston. We have more university students in Boston than in any other city in the U.S. We have more colleges and universities per capita than any other place in the U.S. Yet, we have some of the greatest inequities in terms of educational access and opportunity and attainment. 50 years later, after the landmark desegregation verdict, we still are left with significant work to do. That's not to say that some progress has not been made. It has. And UMass Boston is proud of the role that we have played. UMass Boston was created so that Boston would have a public research university that could serve the great city of Boston. And we are proud that we are the 3rd most diverse university in the country. We're also part of the larger public education ecosystem here in Boston. And if you look at our recently launched strategic plan, education is a key part of not only who we've been and who we are, but of where we're going. And so to have this particular topic focusing on the history and the challenges and the opportunities of desegregation in Boston, it could not be a more timely topic for us here today. But I also want to say that this particular lecture series is especially important and appropriate to be addressing this issue like so many others, because it allows us to recognize that we will not solve the great social and public policy challenges of our times without bringing in various forms of expertise. Now, as somebody who studies higher education, I can tell you that one of the reasons we have universities is to bring together scholarly expertise across a diverse array of fields and disciplines. However, not all expertise is embedded within a university. And I think here at UMass Boston, we recognize that much better than many research universities do. And this lecture was created to bring in thought leaders, to bring in public policy leaders, to bring in other types of expertise that we need to learn from and learn with and work with in order to make an impact on the very issues that we study, on the issues that we teach about, on the issues that matter to us as a member of a larger community. And so I think to have a lecture like this, I'll echo Dr. Edozie's words, that this lecture, is, a flagship event for the university as well as the McCormick School and CLA. And it's because we bring distinguished leaders like Kim Janey here today, people who, again, bring that expertise, but bring their experience, their accomplishments, their work as a leader. And I think that, Mayor Cheney, you have been a leader that has nothing to do with the titles that you have held. You have held those titles because you are a leader. And I think that's something that sometimes we forget when we think about what role does leadership play in making a difference in our communities and making a difference in our society. And positions become levers that we can use, right? Tools that can help us have a greater impact in the kind of change that we want to make. And so that is part of what we're here, right? To think about today, to talk about today, is how do we each, in the various roles that we have, come together to impact policy, to impact practice, to create greater inclusive excellence so that we actually have equitable outcomes in our education system here. So I'm very proud to be able to be part of a community that is so steadfastly engaged in this work. I know that we have much to learn and that we have much to do, but it is forums like this that are going to allow us to have an even greater impact going forward in the future. So yes, we need to understand the history of desegregation in Boston. We need to understand where we are now. But we need to use days like today, moments like this, as opportunities to be a springboard into what are we going to do in the future? What can we learn from each other that will result in action-oriented change? So I applaud you all for being here. I am thankful that we have this time together, and I know that this will be just an outstanding lecture series and that the expanded format will benefit us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost Berger. Thank you. So just before I call up the next speaker to welcome us, and that would be the Interim Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, I want to just read a very important, acknowledgement from Senator Maggie Hassan. So, John Jessup, could you put the backdrop of the Bob Woods photograph up here for me? Thank you. That's right. That is indeed the late Bob Wood, who is our patron, who has endowed us in the Robert C. Wood Visiting Professor in Urban and Public Affairs program, the 26-year-old program. His family is on our committee. We have introduced you to Peggy Wood, who will be presiding over the first inaugural award, a student award, and his daughter, Franny Wood. Another daughter of his is Senator Maggie Hassan. She is the senator of New Hampshire. She wanted us to communicate a very important message to you, so I'd like to read her statement. To Professor Edozie, the Wood Professorship Committee, Mayor Kim, Janie, moderators, panelists, Olivia Dannenberg, and other distinguished guests, I am so sorry that I can't be here today, but I am grateful for all the work that you have done to make this year's program a success. To Mayor Janie, thank you for your work at the community level to make Boston, family by family, street by street, and neighborhood by neighborhood, a more inclusive, just, and thriving society and city. To the moderators and panelists, thank you for the work that you have done to integrate policy, politics, and implementation to make our cities and our democracy places where democracy matters because it delivers. And to Olivia Dannenberg, I am so glad that you are being recognized with the Wood Student Internship Award. You clearly have a deep commitment to the person-to-person work informed by the study and scholarship that makes a difference for all of our people and builds stronger communities, a stronger democracy, and a vibrant and inclusive society. All of you honor my father, whose passionate belief in our democracy and its capacity to deliver better, more delightful, dignified lives for the participants fueled his work, and that all of the people who worked with him. He wanted us to remember that freedom for every one of us was at the core of all progress. I will miss being there in person, but will be live streaming and hoping that the event doesn't get interrupted on my end by any votes. With very good wishes, Maggie Wood Hassan. I just wanted to read that. Thank you, Senator Hassan, and if you are joining us online, Senator Hassan, between votes, vote right, vote for democracy. Okay, I am now pleased to call up the next speaker, and that is the Interim Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Pratima Prasad. She is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. She's a teacher scholar and an academic administrator. She joined the university in 2002 as a faculty member of the Modern Languages, Literatures, and Cultures Department. In this capacity, she taught a wide range of French courses, from introductory offerings and advanced electives in her area of expertise, 19th century French literature and culture. Pratima guided the department as a chairperson from 2013 and was an associate dean of the College of Liberal Arts for several years before assuming her current position as interim dean. Welcome, Pratima. Thank you so much for in honoring us. Is it Pratima? No? No? All right. Sorry. I had one program.
They changed that he was supposed to inform the newspaper, but that's fine.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Do you want to come on?
Okay.
That's fine. I'll just take 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kiki. My name is Adunya Lemmi. I'm the interim director of the McCormack Graduate School. I'll bring Pratima shortly, but let me say a little bit about the McCormack Graduate School first. But before that, I would like to thank Senator Hassan for the message. I was happy to receive her message this morning via email. I'm delighted to hear her kind words and encouraging words to us. Thanks so much. There are some groups that I would like to thank before inviting Pratima here. First, the Wood Lecture Committee, including the Wood family, for being at the meeting all the time, giving us inputs. As Kiki was saying, thank you very much. But among the committee members, I would like to thank Mercy. Mercy, where are you? Yeah. Mercy was thank you. She was the chair of the Wood Lecture last year, and she did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. And this year, she also did a great job helping us organize this event, and thanks so much. I also want to recognize the McCormack Director's Office staff members, Charlotte and Gifty. I don't know where you are, and also Liz Diaz for the support to put this event together. Thank you very much. Honorable Kim Jenny, thank you so much for accepting our offer to come and speak to us and to give us a keynote address. This is wonderful. Thank you. The two panelists, Liv Fenfer and Caroline Cricket, thank you again for coming here to share your experience. Let me say a little bit about the McCormack School, and then I'll invite the dean. The McCormack Lecture, as both of you said, is a flagship event for the McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies. When I took on this interim director position in September, everyone was telling me, you have to get on this event now, in September, and that's what we did. And thank you for the committee member for your work, for putting this such a wonderful event. The McCormack Graduate School's mission and values are to promote impactful, quality research at local, regional, and global levels that help policymakers design policies for the common good. Last week, we had a full-day event on Africa Day with a focus on democracy in West Africa. Last month, we had a webinar on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. We are planning to have another one by the end of the month on similar topics. And we're also planning to expand such event to the South American countries in the coming semesters. Events like the Wood Lecture raises the profile of not only the McCormack Graduate School, but also the university. We're not just bringing people together to discuss the legacy of Mr. Wood. We are bringing people together to discuss policy that matters for Mr. Wood, that had impact on all of us. We discuss education, housing, migration, and related issues to move the policy discourse forward and to find the best outcome for all stakeholders. The McCormack Graduate School will continue to support similar events. It helps us to attract students, faculty who would like to work on policy issues with implication on local and global matters. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to host the Wood Lecture, and once again, thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll enjoy this event. And now to the invitation. Kiki already did the introduction for our dean. Dean Prasad is the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. Since we started the transition, the dean was supportive, not only in words, but financially supported some of the events in the McCormack Graduate School. So we are very grateful for the help. Without the support of the dean, it would be impossible to have a smooth transition and merger of McCormack with CLA. So with that, I will now invite Dean Prasad to give us a opening back. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Odozi, for that wonderful introduction, and Dr. Lemmy. It gives me such immense pleasure, and it is an immense honor to welcome all of you here, our honorable speaker, Kim Janey, moderators, panelists, to the 2024 Wood Lecture. The 2024 iteration of this lecture series is particularly special for me as the CLA Dean, because it is the first time that it is the College of Liberal Arts that is hosting the event. So it's really exciting. Now that it's been a flagship event for the McCormack Graduate School, and we are so glad in CLA and so honored to embrace it as one of our signature events as we move forward, because the late Professor Wood's celebrating his legacy and his life's work seems very fitting for who we are and what we do in CLA. Equity and social justice is part of our core values, and they are woven into everything that we do, whether it's our pedagogical practices, our research, our community work, and our service. So therefore, I'd like to thank the Wood family and your generosity for helping bring this every year to our campus. Peggy and Franny, it was wonderful to meet you this morning, and we wish Maggie could be here with us, but we know she's doing really important work. I'd also like to say that the vision and mission of UMass Boston is enshrined and epitomized in our keynote speaker today, who is not only the first female black mayor of Boston, but also has done amazing work in education and racial justice, which is what UMass Boston stands for. I know that Dr. Dozy is going to say more about you, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. I also want to acknowledge this sort of expanded format and panelists Lou Finfer and Carolyn Crockett, who will be here later. Your work in desegregation, urban policy, housing policy has done really important work for our city and our community, and we're very thankful for that. I hope that there will be I know that there'll be a very engaging afternoon of discussion and debate. Unfortunately, because of my commitments, I cannot be here. I work on racial policy and segregation of a completely different era, which is colonialism and slavery in the French colonies, like Haiti and Martinique and the Indian Ocean colonies. So I'm really disappointed to be missing sort of the cross-fertilization that can happen when I listen to talks that are both related to and not related to what I do. But I also want to thank all the committee members of the Robert Wood Lecture, particularly Chair Edozi, as well as the faculty members, our moderators, Nick and Lorna. Nice to see you here, and good luck for this afternoon. And last but not the least, Olivia Dannenberg, congratulations for being the first inaugural recipient. We're so proud of you, and we think that you, in all the work that you will do going forward, you will sort of continue the legacy of Dr. Wood. Congratulations again. And without further ado, have a great afternoon, and I welcome Dr. Dozy back onto, yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Should I speak in French? No, gracias is Spanish. I forget thank you in French. Merci, of course. Thank you all. So now we get to the core of our program. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker and our 26th Spring 2024 Robert C. Wood Professor in Public and Urban Affairs, the Honorable Kim Janey. Let me say a few words about her. She's a trailblazer in Boston's history, naturally. Let me talk about her early years and her activism. Kim Michelle Janey emerged as a prominent figure in Boston's history from an early age. At 11, she courageously stood on the front lines of the battle for school desegregation during the tumultuous busing era in the 1970s. Faced with rocks and racial slurs, Janey's resilience during those challenging times foreshadowed her future as a fearless leader. In 2021, Kim Janey made history as Boston's first woman and first Black mayor, stepping into this role during the unprecedented challenges posed by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Mayor Janey showcased unwavering leadership. Her tenure prioritized equity, health, and wellness, resulting in the reopening of Boston's economy and schools. Under her leadership, the city achieved its safest summer in 5 years and became one of the most vaccinated major cities in America. Before assuming the mayoralty, Janey broke barriers in 2017 as the first woman elected to represent District 7 on the Boston City Council. In 2020, her peers elected her as the president of the most diverse city council in Boston's history, With 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, Janie championed systematic policy reforms at Massachusetts Advocates for Children, focusing on equity and excellence in Boston public schools. She's an educator and thought leader. In 2022, her commitment to education and racial justice led her to the Institute of Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School, where she served as a spring 2022 resident fellow. She designed and led a study group titled Racial Justice and Recovery, Leading American Cities to a More Equitable Future. As an inaugural fellow at the Berry Institute of Politics at Salem State University, she continued to contribute to thought leadership. Janie taught a class at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health titled Leadership in Health Policy. Last year, Janie was selected as one of 20 leaders across the country to serve as a 2023 Aspen Institute Ascend Fellow, where she and her cohort are working to advance the prosperity and well-being of children and families across the United States. Economic mobility and recognition. She was appointed the president and CEO of Economic Mobility Pathways, EMPATH. In June 2022, Janie took on a national role to help individuals experiencing deep poverty climb the economic ladder. Her dedication to public service has been recognized with numerous awards. Her legacy, her values, a proud fourth-generation Roxbury resident, Kim Janie comes from a lineage of educators, entrepreneurs, artists, and advocates, guided by the values instilled in her own upbringing, the importance of education, the power of community organizing, and the fundamental principles of equity and justice. Mayor Janie continues to leave an enduring impact on Boston and beyond. Thus said, on behalf of the 2024 Robert C. Wood Committee, it is our honor to confer you the role of the 2024 Robert C. Wood Visiting Professor in Public and Urban Affairs. You join a cohort of dynamic public servants and public intellectuals who have held this distinguished role. Congratulations, and thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Kiki. I always like to begin with gratitude, so I want to start by thanking the Wood Committee and your illustrious chairwoman, Dr. Kiki Edozie, for this invitation. I want to thank your director and your provost, your dean, the students here at this university, the distinguished panelists. I want to congratulate Olivia, and I want to extend my deep, deep gratitude to Robert C. Wood and the entire Wood family. It's also sad that the senator couldn't be here, but it is a delight to sit with you at your table and to hear about your husband's great, great legacy. So many thanks to the entire Wood family. It is a joy to be here at UMass. This is my mother's alma mater, and we are on the eve of her mother's birthday, my grandmother's birthday, and I'm so glad that my mother could be here today as my special guest. She's the one sitting here with the camera. Thank you so much, Mummy. I am really blessed to have experienced my mother's love and support growing up, and I am extremely grateful to have grown up in a family of educators who instilled in me the importance of a quality education. Just last week, my mom and I were in North Carolina for a family trip, and it reminded me of how she would always share stories about her maternal grandparents who were from North Carolina before their great migration, of course, to the great city of Boston in the 1920s. And her grandparents, they were born in 1889 in North Carolina. Neither of my great-grandparents finished school. They were smart, but like most poor folks, especially folks in the South during this time, they had to quit school to help their families. In the South, they were farmers. They picked tobacco and cotton, and they grew food. My mother tells me that my great-grandfather was a jack of all trades. He was a handyman, good at carpentry. And while my great-grandparents moved north for opportunity, my great-grandfather would go back down south every summer, even after the family had moved north. And once in Boston, they settled in the South End, and they became domestic workers. Now, I never got to know my great-grandfather. He died the year I was born, but I was blessed to have my great-grandmother with me until I was 15 years old. And whenever we visited Granny's house, we would hear stories about how my great-grandfather built a schoolhouse for Black children while still in Oxford, North Carolina. It was a source of pride in our family, and it reinforced this notion that education was important and that Black people, like my great-grandfather, would go to great lengths to make sure that Black children had access to education and the opportunity to learn. And I'm so grateful for those stories of my great-grandfather building that schoolhouse for Black children in the early 1900s. It made me realize that I am the remnant of my ancestors' resilience and that my personal freedom journey started long before I was even born. Now, on my father's side of the family, I also heard several stories that were passed down through the generations. I remember learning about my ancestors who had escaped slavery in the American South via the Underground Railroad, and they made it all the way to Canada. In Canada, they took back their freedom, and they settled in Nova Scotia. It was in Nova Scotia that my great-great-great-grandfather, Esau Janey, served in leadership roles in both the African Abolition Society and the African Union Society. And this was back in the 1850s, before the American Civil War. Now, around the same time, here in Boston, in the middle of the 19th century, another fight for freedom was underway. A father, a Black father, Benjamin Roberts, wanted what we all want for our children, a high-quality education. And like so many parents, he had to fight for it. In 1848, his daughter, 5-year-old Sarah Roberts, was assigned an inferior, segregated school for Black children in Boston. And when her father tried to enroll her in the local school that was closer to her house, reserved for white students, she was forcibly removed by a police officer at 5 years old. Sarah's father filed a lawsuit, and this case went all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and in 1850, the Roberts case upheld racial segregation, and Jim Crow was born right here in the city of Boston. The court's ruling was the precursor and the precedent for codifying separate but equal in the United States Supreme Court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, in 1896, which was 50 years, nearly 50 years later. Now, Mr. Roberts was not alone. Black people have always had to fight for quality education in this country. 10 years after the Massachusetts Supreme Court upheld racial segregation in the Roberts case, the United States Senate heard arguments against educating black children. And stamped from the beginning, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi makes reference to Jefferson Davis, the United States Senator from Mississippi, who would go on to commit the highest crime known to law, treason, as the President of the Confederacy. And in 1860, Senator Davis rose on the Senate floor to oppose a bill that would fund education for black people. Benjamin Roberts knew what so many parents know, and that is a good education is key to future success. And in fact, a high-quality education has often been called the great liberator, or the civil rights issue of our time. Frederick Douglass, who during this time back in the 1800s in Massachusetts was urgently fighting for emancipation for enslaved Americans, and he said, this is his quote, "Education means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul of man into the glorious light of truth, the light by which men can only be made free." Now, the first point that I want to highlight this afternoon is that the fight for quality education in the Americas is not new. It predates the Garrity Court Order of 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, or even the Roberts case in 1850. This fight is centuries old, and it dates back to the very first African who was brought to these shores and denied an education. 400 plus years later, we're still in that fight. Indeed, educational inequality is as American as apple pie. Inequality is built into America's educational system. Our origin story as a nation makes clear who was worthy of an education and who was not. And most opportunities back then, and some would say even today, those opportunities were afforded to white men. Now, back then, people understood that an educated citizenry was needed to ensure the growth and prosperity of our nascent nation. Horace Mann was the very first Massachusetts Secretary of the Board of Education, and that was the first position of its kind in our country. Largely regarded as the father of public education, Mann represented Massachusetts in Congress up until 1853, which meant he was serving in Congress during the Roberts case. And if Mann is the father of public education, Boston is unquestionably the birthplace. I've been proud, always very proud, that the very first public school in our country was founded here, Boston Latin School, and that is the school that my father graduated high school from in 1964, and he was just one of 8 black boys to graduate that year. My father would tell me stories of how black kids were counseled to leave Latin school and to go across the street to English High. Some of his classmates did just that. My father stood firm, however, determined to excel despite teachers telling him he did not belong because he lived in Orchard Park projects. Now, Boston Latin School, as we all know, was founded in 1635, and that is close to 150 years before America declared its independence. 6 years after Latin School was founded, Massachusetts became the very first colony to legalize slavery. And while Boston takes great pride in its abolitionist history, it has struggled to live up to those ideals. Separate but equal, first established in the Sarah Roberts case, would be the law of the land until the groundbreaking United States Supreme Court case argued by Thurgood Marshall, who would later become the first African American appointed to serve on that body. Now, the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling determined that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Following the landmark Brown decision, school districts were very slow to respond. There were several integration efforts throughout the South, and we know many of them. 1957, for example, there was Daisy Bates, who worked tirelessly to ensure the safety of Little Rock 9 as they integrated Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas. We know about Little Ruby Bridges in 1960 when she was integrating an elementary school in New Orleans. But many people don't know the stories of the North. Now, my parents came of age during the Civil Rights Movement. They graduated high school the same year that President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and they were very much influenced by other students in the movement. As a teenager, my mother attended a freedom school at St. Cyprian Church in Roxbury so that she could hear Stokely Carmichael give a speech. She would also show solidarity with students in the South by picketing outside of the Woolworths here in the North. My father, he led an effort to take over the president's office as a student at Northeastern University, and I know there are some students here. If you want to get some ideas, don't blame me. But he and other students, my dad and other students, they were pushing for diversity, equity, and inclusion long before anyone ever coined the phrase DEI. The students presented 10 demandments that included a push for professors that looked like them, courses that reflected the contributions and history of Black people, and a safe space for Black people, Black students, to gather on campus. Their advocacy led to, among other things, the creation of what is now called the John D. O'Brien African American Institute at Northeastern. And as a civil rights baby, I was born the year Massachusetts established the Racial Imbalance Act in an effort to desegregate schools, and this gave the State Board of Education the authority to investigate and reduce racial imbalances in public schools. Now, a school was determined to be racially imbalanced if 50% or more of its students were students of color. And not surprisingly, schools that were predominantly Black were assigned less qualified teachers and received fewer resources. And so the second piece that I would highlight today is this broader context surrounding the Garrity Order. And as I think about my own story and my own educational experiences, I see that they reflect Boston's complicated history of racial inequities. Now, for me, my foundation was firm. For the first 2 years of my schooling, I attended a Black independent community school that was born out of the Black liberation movement of the 1960s. Black parents, frustrated with the public school system, they organized. They boycotted schools. They organized transportation to other BPS schools across the city. They started their own schools outside of the school district. Black-run, Black-led independent schools organized by Black parents. Now, I attended New School for Children. Anyone in this room know about New School for Children? Some hands, thank you. I attended New School for Children in 1970. Now, two big things happened to me in 1970. One was I went to the Jackson 5 concert at the Boston Garden. But that's another speech. The other important life-changing thing that happened in 1970 is I went to New School for Children. I was 5 years old, and this school was mostly Black by design. One of the things that I remember about my 2 years at New School for Children is the way the school made me feel. And they were feelings that my 5-year-old self could not put into words. I felt seen. I felt connected to people who were not just like me and didn't just look like me, but they cared for me deeply. I felt safe. But that would be short-lived. In the spring of 1972, as I was completing what would be my last year at the New School for Children, the Boston branch of the NAACP filed a class action lawsuit against the Boston School Committee, Morgan v. Hennigan. And one of our esteemed panelists is the grandchild of one of the plaintiffs in that case. I want to thank Carolyn and Lou for their work lifting up this important piece of American history. By the fall of 1972, I was enrolled in Boston Public Schools for second grade. But they wanted to hold me back a grade and make me repeat the first grade because they believed that the Black community school that I had attended for kindergarten and first grade lacked academic rigor. Now, fortunately for me, my parents fought to have me placed in my correct grade, and that became an early lesson in the power of parent voice and advocacy that I would carry with me throughout my career. And despite my new school district's low expectations of me, I excelled throughout elementary school. I was a straight A honor roll student, and I enjoyed learning. In 1974, 20 years after Brown versus Board of Education, Judge W. Arthur Garrity issued a desegregation order for Boston Public Schools. School buses would transport Black children to white schools in white neighborhoods and white children to schools that were predominantly Black. And I was bused during the second phase of the court order. In 1976, I was living at my granny's house in the South End. Up until that point, I had been attending predominantly Black schools in Roxbury, the David A. Ellis School, the William Lloyd Garrison School, the Henry L. Higginson School. And now living in the South End at Granny's house, I was assigned to the Clarence R. Edwards Middle School in Charlestown. My parents were not happy. I had been excelling in Roxbury schools. What did Charlestown have that Roxbury didn't? How would sitting next to a white child make me a better student? I was only 11 years old, and it was clear by the angry backlash that we were not wanted in Charlestown. Once the school year began, my parents initially kept me home. They refused to send me, and I finally had to go or risk social services getting involved in our family. So I went to school. Now, Charlestown was a white working class neighborhood where school buses were greeted each day with racial slurs and rocks and sticks and cans. And because of violence and the threat of violence, our school buses had to be escorted by the police pretty often. And while it's true the Boston School Committee and other policymakers favored white students and directed resources toward them, it's not as if the white working class students of Charlestown were experiencing an educational panacea, or that these kids for Charlestown were flocking to Harvard or Princeton or Yale upon graduation. If they graduated at all, a factory job or perhaps a civil service job would be waiting for them, but it's not like they were experiencing this wonderful educational experience. And inside the school, while there could be racial tension for sure, there were also friendships across racial lines. We were just middle school kids. Now, fortunately for me, my time being bused to Charlestown was short-lived. Once again, I was the beneficiary of organizing efforts of Black parents. Shortly after I was born, Black parents would found the Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity Incorporated, better known as METCO, which people I think know is a voluntary busing program that took students who were from Boston and would transport them out to the suburbs. My parents removed me from the volatile middle school that I was forced to attend, and instead I enrolled for junior high, 8th grade, in Reading, at Parker Junior High, for anyone who's from the North Shore. And Reading is a suburban town north of Boston, and I was able to go because of the METCO program. Now, growing up In a family of educators, along with my own varied educational experiences, I knew that quality education is not only a pathway to productive citizenship and individual success, but it is a way to strengthen families and transform communities. And my work has always been deeply rooted in the belief that parents must be treated as respected partners in their children's education. 50 years after the Garrity court order, and the public schools in Boston are still segregated by race, and families are still desperately seeking and demanding quality. Now, our public schools have struggled to meet the varied needs of our diverse students. Whether students with special needs, Black and Latino boys, losing my voice, we also know that school discipline, oh my goodness. I'm gonna need that table over there to step in for me, because they know what I'm talking about. All right, now all of these policies we know. I appreciate you, Marcy. These policies disproportionately impact Black students too often. Too frequently, our schools are ill-prepared to receive immigrant children who speak languages other than English, especially if they've had an interruption in their education or if they've experienced trauma. And while there have been investments in social emotional learning, nothing could have prepared us for COVID. And it's had a lasting impact on our children who were already experiencing a racial opportunity gap, and now with the pandemic, even bigger divides. Thank you, Marcy. Now, the pandemic laid bare the inequities that were already here, and it made things worse. And if that wasn't enough, school districts all across our country have been banning the contributions of Black Americans and others in an effort to control the narrative. So the third point that I really want to share with you is that as we think about the challenges we're facing and the work that remains, it is so important to lift up Black parents. Black parents who founded schools, who organized Operation Exodus, who formed MECO, who filed a lawsuit, who joined the NAACP, who challenged the status quo, who demanded more. They stood in the gap and they fought for Black children. Too often, our story is focused on yellow buses, white flight, but not on Black children, or the organizing efforts of Black parents. And as with many movements for racial justice, Black women were at the forefront for the fight for quality education here in Boston. So as I reflect on that time, there were so many instances where Black women were forming a wall of protection and a bridge for young people to cross. We are all blessed to stand on the shoulders of giants. So as I close, I want to thank and lift up Black women who paved the way for a little Black girl from Roxbury who would grow up to lead her city. So I speak your name, Ruth Batson, Ellen Jackson, Elizabeth Johnson, Muriel Snowden, Julia Walker, Jean McGuire, Angela Page Cook, Melnia Cass, Joyce King, Tallulah Morgan, Mary Crockett, and Phyllis Janey. So many others. And now, as I begin and try to recuperate my voice, as I end, I will end as I began, and that is with deep, deep gratitude. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Wow, thank you so much, the Honorable Mayor Kim Janey. What a fantastic address. I think we'll relieve you of the Q&A because of your voice. You're nursing your voice. Are you able to take? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Marcy. Okay. Yeah, okay. Yes, please. How about you? Yeah. Let me sit down while we take questions. Great. Thank you. Maybe we'll give that to Amrith. Is Amrith here? Or to, okay. And we need to get some water as well. We'll get that for you. Okay. Okay. Well, the question and answer section is open. If you have questions for the Honorable Kim Janey, now is the time. Questions, comments?
Testing. Questions? Comments, reflections?
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, yes, sir. We'll bring the mic
Say
to you.
your name. Tell me who you are.
Well, Kim, my name is Jonathan Jackson. I've known you through various different people. I'd like to thank you first for being that Black woman leader for Boston and making those changes, and being also a MECO student in giving a platform in honor to people like Gene McGuire, who helped us get through busing, through MECO and all that other stuff. So I do appreciate, because I'm just a little younger than you, not that younger, but.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Do you have a question?
Well, my question is that you had said that you see that there's still racial inequality. What kind of racial inequality do you see that's happening in education? I feel that it is, because I'm an MBA student here, and I see some kind of indifferences.
Yep. So
Like-
I would say this. I want to be clear to acknowledge the progress that we have made over the last 50 years in our schools. We have certainly made progress. We see students who are performing better on different metrics. Too often, we are relying too heavily on standardized tests to measure how well students are doing, and that those kinds of measures can often penalize schools rather than supporting schools. And so we have to figure out how to understand what is happening in our classrooms in a way that doesn't further penalize our students. But when we do look at this data, we can see clear gaps. And we understand enough to know that those gaps are rooted in gaps around opportunity and what children have not been exposed to. And so we have a lot more work to do on all fronts. If we're talking about literacy, if we're talking about early ed, if we're talking about access to certain curricula, there's a lot more work that we have to do. And so for any of the folks here who are educators, certainly want to lift up and applaud the work that you're doing. We know it isn't easy. Again, I'm blessed to come from a family of educators, and so I've seen this from, I think, different standpoints, from someone who's trying to influence policy, someone who's actually teaching in front of students, someone who's been a parent to a BPS graduate, and an advocate. We have work to do, but many of those same issues, sadly, that we were fighting for 50 plus years ago are still present. Other questions? Yes, please, Fran. You want to stand up and say, let people know who you are?
I'm the managing director of the Center for Law and Education. We represented the black plaintiffs for 20 years in the DSEG case, and Kim and I were advocates at MAC together. I'm curious about, especially as you've been doing lectures in the academy, what is the significance and the importance of this history to people who have nothing to do with it? And I have two questions. One is, if you could create a public policy, or if you could wave a magic wand to influence the racism in the Boston public schools and all places of learning, what might you do?
Okay, two-parter there.
You know me.
Of course. Let's start with the last one, and hopefully I'll retain the first one. One, there aren't any magic wands, there aren't any silver bullets, there is no way that we can snap our fingers out of 400 years of oppression. It's just not, that's just not how things work. So that means we have to roll up our sleeves and do the work. If we're talking about education, I've always been a big believer in a district like Boston that we need to invest in our school leaders. We have to trust our school leaders to build phenomenal educational teams. We have one of our former school leaders here in this audience. That is the work that you've got to do. We can clap for Suzanne. You all better clap for Suzanne Lee. And for folks who don't know, Suzanne began her career, I believe, in 1974, which is also the year my father began his career as an educator. September 12th, 1974 was his first day of work. And so I believe we have to support our school leaders to build strong educational teams. We also have to use a lens that goes beyond our own individual experiences and understanding that many of our students who particularly are showing up in Boston are coming with very varied experiences. Some of our children, particularly now as we see more and more folks flocking to the US, seeking asylum, they've experienced some kind of trauma. We've got to understand how to respond to that. Your first part of your question, Fran, you talked about how do we help people understand this when they're not connected to this history. What's the significance if they're not connected to this history? I would argue that we're all connected to this history. There isn't any history that we can say, oh, that's them over there. If we understand the interconnectedness of human beings and how the different experiences that we have some sort of ripple effect. And so even if it's only about concern for our future workforce, like even if that is your limited concern for what happens with kids, you should care because they are our future workforce. My mother and I on the way over here were talking about the different generations, and I was saying to her, well, thank God you've got Gen X. The boomers got Gen X. I'm not sure who Gen X has coming up behind us, but that's another conversation. So I would just argue that we're all connected, and it's important that we lift up, that we understand, that we reflect, that we dissect this history, that we promote it in current day classrooms, that we really, it's bizarre to me that we don't have this universally across our schools, not just in Boston, across the country, for God's sakes. It's insane that we don't. And instead, there's an effort to kind of, clamp down this history, sadly. I see there was a hand over here. Yes.
Hi. Kim, my name is Christine Bozeman Burns, and I'm glad to be here. I, fortunately, was one of the Boston Public Schools students who was in that busing segregation. It was awful. But going to Boston Public Schools, and I have a 23-year-old grandson, and an 11-year-old daughter. And what I've noticed that should be given back into our schools is writing. My grandson, writing, printing and writing, English, whatever they have. My grandson is 23 years old. He doesn't know how to write cursor. He knows how to print. Grant you the the computers is given even during that time, that's nice. But they need to have basics back, Brad, because we can't do a DocuSign on the computer like they're having us do, because it's not our real signature. But my grandkids do not know how to write. And as a 1972 Boston segregation student going to school for the first 2 years, we had to learn how to defend before we even picked up a book. It was scary. I was 14 years old. And today, I'm honored that I have gotten a degree here at UMass Boston in 2013. But when I first came here in 1990, I had no interest of getting an education because I didn't understand the basics of reading or writing English and stuff like that, because like I said, we had to defend for the first 2 years.
Tell me your name again.
My name is Christine Bozeman Burns.
Christine, thank you so much for sharing your story, Christine. I just want to reflect on a couple of things that you said. And one, applaud your advocacy. So that's definitely what we need. We need for this partnership between parents and caregivers who are raising children and their grandchildren to have this partnership with their schools, their kids' teacher. And it's important to, I believe, form those partnerships early on. And I say when the sun is shining, don't wait for the storm. Too often, the first call is when there's some sort of problem. And so instead of waiting for the problem, because the problem's going to come. You can't get through 12 years of school without getting, I mean, it's unusual if you are able to get through 12 years of school without getting the call. So the call will come, build those strong relationships, continue to advocate and be that voice, and speak up. I think it's strange too that children are not learning to write. Mostly I joke about it with my mom when we're coming to events like this, talking about what's wrong with this generation coming up behind us. But the truth is, our young people, it's easy for us to laugh and joke like they're a lost cause. Our young people are extremely resilient. They have always been at the forefronts of our movements. They are the ones who are on college campuses all over our country now, demanding certain rights. They're the ones fighting for our planet. And we need to make sure that they get the quality education that they so deserve. So I just want to applaud you, Christine, for your advocacy and speaking up today. Yes, and then back there. So you and then the gentleman behind you. Yes. I don't know who has the mic. I could give this one up, I guess. I don't need two.
Hello, thank you, Kim. I too was bused in 1974. I was 14 years old to South Boston, which, as we all know, was a horrific experience. And I've been working with Lou in the Desegregation project. And, you know, people are talking about this history. Why do we need to know? And the other day I was just reading, and I'll share with you guys, it says, today is so much a product of yesterday that yesterday can only be understood as it is explained by today. For the present is simply the developing past, the past, an undeveloped present. And I want to also share that I have a granddaughter who is a 5th grader at Abington School. Just recently, she was helping in the gym, and one of the little white boy that is in her class, he was like, oh yeah, that's your job, you're a slave. So this is why it is so important to know history, to understand it, so that we can put it into context. And I'm working with Lou and a few other people, because our stories should be told in the Boston public school system. And that legacy continues. Just like your parents, my mother migrated here from Mississippi, where I was born. She accepted a job as a live-in maid for a family in Framingham because they were recruiting maids, domestic workers, to come to Boston. And my mother desperately wanted to get away from the Jim Crow South, and she ran right into another form of Jim Crow here in Boston. again, the education system is to take away our power, because when you aren't educated, you have no power. And so, thankfully, after coming out of South Boston, I went to 3 high schools in a 4-year period, and I didn't get accepted into the college that I wanted, which was BU. But luckily, there was an HBCU in Tennessee that saw something in me, and I was able to go to college. So I'm here advocating for it.
Amen. Just a quick reflection. I appreciate you sharing. And as someone who was bused back then, and Charlestown was a little Southie, so I clearly know what you experienced. You mentioned something about your granddaughter being in Abington. Is that Mecco? No, her parents live there, but it's a predominantly white school district. Yeah. Yeah, I shared in my remarks that, you know, my parents pulled me out of those 2 years of busing at Charlestown and got me into Mecco. I should also say that while I received a much better education in Reading, there's no question in my mind I wouldn't trade it and go to a BPS high school, especially back then, at all. It was not without its challenges. It wasn't like Reading had solved all of our race problems back in 1978. They had not. They had not. And so while it was different than the rocks that I saw coming at me, it was the things that you don't see coming at you, the things that end up in your back that was often problematic in Reading. So I do want to highlight that. And I know there was a gentleman behind you who wanted to. Oh, okay, you're all set? Thank you, sir.
Oh, did Professor Johnson want to? You sure? All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
My name's Jason. I'm a first-year student in the doctoral program, public policy. My question is, for a long time I've been working on a book, and I've interviewed a lot of the change agents involved in this. You know, LaVall Walson spoke with me. He was very proud of, you know, presiding as superintendent when the segregation order was lifted, the desegregation order from Judge Garrity. Superintendent Harrison Jones, you know, she spoke about her vision when she came in. Mayoral control was a big issue. You know, so there've been all these ideas about what's going to solve this. You know, G. McGuire told me Ruth Batson had said Metco wasn't supposed to last for decades. It was supposed to be an interim solution that was going to fix the problem. It was just going to kind of be there's an alternative until this was fixed. But across the decades, there have been so many well-intentioned people but who believe in change. Mel King told me Judge Garrity's order was necessary, but Mel said, but it was taking change, you know, it was taking the power to make change out of our community, out of our hands, and it was letting someone else do it. But there's all these well-intentioned people, but what's missing? Why does the change not stick? What else does it take besides believing in the change? What needs to happen to make the change be sustainable? There's so many well-intentioned people.
Question. This is the great question to end on. Thank you for this. And there's so much in there to unpack. You know, one of the things, you quoting Mel King and saying we needed that court order, but was that the right thing? You know, as someone who spent a good chunk of her time trying to influence educational policy, it never, ever, ever made sense. And I'm biased because my parents were angry. They were not supporting this whole busing thing. They didn't like it from the beginning. Before I even got on the school bus, they kept me home. What I never understood, though, is how you declare something in June, and then 2 months later in September, poof, here we are. Anyone, any educator in this room, anyone who has ever worked on change or policy knows it doesn't work that way. You need a thoughtful plan. So even if we were going to have a busing plan, and we can debate whether that was the right plan to have or not, but even if we were going to have a busing plan, how does that solve the educational question? Because we were talking about quality education. We weren't talking about how we get kids to and from school. Now, there was a belief, you know, the question I posed in my remarks, what is it about Charlestown that Roxbury didn't have? And the reality is that wasn't a better school. It was the first time my grades slipped. It was the first time I knew that the adults in my school building didn't care about me. I literally had a teacher tell me, I'm going to get paid whether you learn or not, so you guys can just keep doing whatever you want to do. I'm just going to sit back and read the newspaper. That never happened in elementary school. And so it didn't solve the educational challenges that we were facing. Your other question, though, is the bigger elephant in the room, is what is it going to take? Everybody in this room, I'm assuming, cares about education, wants young people to succeed, understands that there are historical issues around being left out with discriminatory policies that have gotten us to this place. I assume people kind of have those kinds of basics, and that there is this kind of political will to want to do something. What I have learned as someone who has tackled these problems from different perspectives, as an advocate and activist, as someone who is a paid advocate trying to influence policy and building different relationships from the top down with teachers all the way up to the superintendent, as someone who was in city government, as a city councilor, and as mayor of Boston. And what I've learned in all of those roles is how difficult that this, I think it was Julio Enriquez that used to talk about the chairs on the Titanic, one of the activists I worked with over the years, that you're just moving the chairs around, that to turn this ship is really difficult. And it's going to take some radical things that people who say they want them may not be for. It means you might have to look at the contract. That's not popular. People want to support educators and say, I stand with teachers. Well, I do stand with teachers. I come from a family of teachers. But it also means we've got to look at what are the barriers that are preventing us. And they're not just there. It's too easy to say it's the contract or it's the union. That's the easy thing. You've got to look at all of this, and it's hard. It is hard. That being said, I don't believe it's impossible. I do think there are models out there for us to look at. Part of our challenge in Boston, though, is we think we're so special. It's true. We think we can't learn anything from anywhere else because we've done it all. We're the best. We're the most improved. We're this, we're that. Look at our broad prize. That prize was 1990 something? When did we get, somebody on that table, when did we get that broad prize? Was it 96, 99, 2001? Thank you. But how many years ago was that? So the point I'm making, though, is we think we're so special, and that can get in our way, this whole exceptionalism. It means that there isn't anything that we can learn out there. We're always trying to be the best. And don't get me wrong, I love my city. You can't be mayor of the city and not love Boston. Like, there are a lot of things to celebrate about our city, but we need some humility when it comes to education and policies that are really going to work. And in all of this, we have to lift up our most vulnerable children, the children who are most disproportionately impacted by all of the decisions we make. And so if we're not looking at policy through the lens of what does this mean for students with disabilities, what does this mean for students who have experienced trauma, what does this mean for students who are homeless, what does this mean for whatever that lens is, you've got to lift up the most vulnerable. If you do right by them, you might make it. I'm not the biggest fan in the rising tide lifts all boats. That only works if you've got a boat. Otherwise, you're drowning. You are drowning. So you have to make sure that folks are fortified with their boats. And we got to realize not everyone has the same boat. See, that's the challenge here. We're out here thinking, oh, everyone has a boat, just work hard, you'll make it. Not everyone has the same boat. Some are out here with these cruise ships and these ocean liners, and some people have a raft from Gilligan's Island. Like, it's crazy. So I appreciate the question. I think that is why we have these events, these discussions, to try to solve some of these tough, persistent challenges. Anyway, I want to wrap up. I see Dr. Kiki getting up, so I want to wrap up and again extend my deep, deep gratitude for the thoughtful questions and the engagement and the opportunity to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you again, Mayor Janey, but also Professor Janey, as the Honorable Robert C. Wood Committee, Professor in Urban and Public Affairs. Thank you so much for that address. It was really informative, passionate, enlightening, and inspiring. And we're not done with you yet. Your work is not done today. We're just moving you to a different part of the program. And to help us facilitate that part of the program, I'm going to call up two Robert C. Wood Committee members. And that is, one is Amrit Fernandez Prabhu, who is a social policy researcher and doctoral student in the McCormick School of Policy and Global Studies. And the other is Dr. Krista Kelleher, who serves as a research and policy director at UMass Boston's Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy. And she's also an associate for the Edward J. Collins Center for Public Management at the McCormick School. So Krista and Amrit, if you can take us to the next level. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this afternoon's discussion. Lou Finfer, I invite you to take a seat. He's missing. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Lou. Doing the work. While living and working in Dorchester in the 1970s, Lou experienced firsthand how desegregation and busing led to deep social divisions, albeit some social progress. A Boston Globe article in 2022 described Lou as a quiet leader who spent the past 4 decades orchestrating some of Boston's biggest campaigns for social and economic justice. The network of organizations he established is known as the Communities Network. I have that wrong. Close. Where he served first as its director and later as its senior advisor. In 2023, Lou founded the Massachusetts Action for Justice, and along with Carolyn Crockett, he is the co-chair of the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative. With that, let me introduce to you Carolyn Crockett. I invite you to come up and take a seat.
She was on her way from teaching.
Working at the nexus of education, economic development, and urban revitalization, Dr. Crockett is the Assistant Professor of Urban History, Public Policy and Planning at MIT. Her research focuses on large-scale land use changes in the 20th century American cities, and she examines social and geographic implications of structural poverty. Upon her appointment as the first chief of equity for the city of Boston, Mayor Walsh noted Dr. Crockett's record and accomplishments speak volumes about her passion and drive to move the needle on big issues. Along with Lou, she's the co-chair of the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative. Dr. Crockett earned her PhD from Yale University and her master's in geography from the London School of Economics. She also has a master's in arts and religion from Yale Divinity School. And Dr. Kelleher will introduce today's moderators.
I really look forward to our discussion this afternoon, to be moderated by Professors Nick Jurovich and Lorna Rivera, who are my colleagues. So I invite them up now. Dr. Nick Jurovich is Assistant Professor of History and Labor Studies and Associate Director of the Labor Resource Center at UMass Boston. He's co-director of the Boston Teachers Union Collections Project and teaches about struggles for educational justice in Boston in both his undergraduate and graduate courses. His first book, very exciting, Para-Power, How Paraprofessional Labor Changed Education, will be published this December. Professor Jerovich earned his PhD in history from Columbia University. Dr. Lorna Rivera, and I invite you up, esteemed colleague, Lorna, is director of the Mauricio Gaston Institute for Latino Community Development and Public Policy and associate professor of women's gender, sexuality studies, and Latino studies at UMass Boston. Her research focuses on women's and family literacy programs, social welfare reform policies, health disparities based on gender, race, and ethnicity, and the education of Latinx students. She oversees the talented and gifted and Alerta after-school programs for Latinx bilingual students in Boston Public Schools, and she is leading several projects examining the impact of COVID-19 on immigrant and Latinx communities. Professor Rivera earned her PhD in sociology from Northeastern University.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. And let me start by thanking again Mayor Janey for that history lesson. As a history professor, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And thank you to the Wood family, to the Wood Committee, McCormick Graduate School, CLA, for convening us here today. We have a lot to talk about, and I am truly in awe of the folks up here with me and also all the knowledge we have in this room. So we've asked our panelists to start by telling us a little bit about who they are, and Lou is getting some exactly, some visual aids for you all to tell us how they are connected to this history and connect their experiences and their work right now in the present to what we heard from Mayor Janey. So Lou, would you like to kick us off?
That was about where we were in 1974.
Sure.
Oh.
Cannot be contained.
I would suggest moving all of the chairs forward.
Thank
just
you.
to avoid that. Again.
Thank you. This reminds me of my friend Mark Ford when his father was addressing a strike at St. John's University, and because he came drinking to the event, he fell off the stage. So I'm not drunk. I'm drunk with expectations, but thank you. There's so many people to thank. Professor Kiki for organizing this event, the members of the committee. There's so many who were mentioned. Especially want to recognize again the Wood family, Franny and Peggy and Senator Hassan for your roles in this. And obviously Robert Wood, what a life. Secretary of HUD, head of UMass, head of the Boston Public Schools, citywide coordinating committee, and many more things. What a life he led. And I also want to single out Marcy Merningham, who's been at the heart of this for 26 years, and her previous service working with Robert Wood. So I want to recognize Marcy again. Congratulations, Olivia, and we look forward to working with you at the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative. And just before I forget, before you go, if you go over to that corner, there are letters that were written to Judge Garrity by a cross-section of parents, politicians, students that UMass Archives and Andrew Elder heads put out. There are photographs that we gathered from the Northeastern University's archives of photos of students both in the 1960s, as Kim lifted up, leading the fight for desegregation and school equity that started long before the 74 case, and what happened to the students like Christina and Leola, who were in some of the pictures when they went to the schools. So I want to lift up some of that. So please, if you can, remember to take a peek over there, because there's a lot there. In 1974, I was a community organizer with the Dorchester Community Action Council. Boston was a pretty segregated city back then. It's hard to think other than maybe the South End to a degree in Dorchester, any neighborhood that was integrated. Every other neighborhood was all white or all black, and mostly they were all white neighborhoods. Obviously, there's some more diversity, and there's integration of public housing that's changed, but back then, there wasn't much different. We were, I think, the only large-scale integrated community organization in the city in that period. And it was really hard it's hard to kind of think about this then. For about a year and a half, when busing started and all the different events that happened inside the schools, especially in about 6 high schools, such as Christine and Leola went to, but not just high schools. Kim pointed out it happened to her in middle schools. It was a very difficult time, and when we had to choose where to hold the meeting, we'd hold them all at the Grover Cleveland School in Fields Corner. That was the only place in all of Dorchester, a community then of 160,000 people, that our black members and our white members felt it was neutral ground they could go. Any other place, including ones that were 2 blocks away, some of our black members, some of our white members said, I don't feel comfortable there. So unless the meeting was about a specific issue in Cobman Square or Lower Mills, then we could hold it there, but otherwise we held them all at the Grover Cleveland. That's a portrait of the difficulties, the pressures, the trauma that Leola and Christine carry with them. And even the words, if you talk to people who are from that age period, who are white working class, they call it busing. If you talk to people who are African Americans and liberal whites, they call it desegregation. Even the same, what happened has different names to people. It's a question, it shows the separation that's there. So, and I just want to lift up just some of the, I don't know, am I going on too? That's probably enough.
Thanks so much, Lou. Dr. Crockett, did you want to tell us a little about how you come to this history? Think about it.
Yeah, is this on? Can you hear me? Great. How's everybody? Good afternoon. It is so nice to see you. I am sprinting from class, so was very sorry to miss Mayor Janey's incredible remarks. I can just tell. I can feel the energy that has already been lifted up in this place, and really appreciating the entire team that brings us here, the UMass family and community. Professor Kiki, thank you so much for all of this, and this incredible panel of witnesses, of flamethrowers, and people who are really standing into account, sort of pulling us into a deeper reckoning moment. That is what this panel represents for me. So really appreciative, again, of the chance to be here. So for me, a big part of my job as a sort of co-chair with the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative, I always say, is to try to keep up with Lou, which is nearly impossible, but I try. A little bit over 2 years ago, Lou pulled a big group of folks together to start thinking about what it would mean to reflect on the 50th anniversary of school desegregation in Boston, which we know is this year. And so for a while now, 40 plus folks have been meeting, people who were young people on the bus, like Mayor Janey, parents, teachers, folks who were in City Hall, stakeholders, people who were in the neighborhoods. That is what this body represents, people who really care, not just about what happened before, but are trying to be very mindful of what the lessons were learned, have been learned, and how can we carry that forward. And so that's kind of the 3-part theme and frame for the Boston Busing and Desegregation Initiative. And Lou is exactly right, that there is not a small amount of controversy about even the naming of such an initiative. Should we even use the word busing because of how much it actually minimizes and marginalizes a larger civil rights fight, a larger history that I'm sure Mayor Janey spoke to, a longer timeline of activists and actors, and particularly Black actors and parents, people who have been really pushing for this for a long, long time. But in choosing this, the name and the framing, we wanted to call out a particular moment and to trouble it. as well. Because in order to really mine the lessons, the wisdom, the sense of survival and thirsting for more, that's really at the heart of this, the commitment that there is more that we can deliver for our children, for our neighborhood, for the city, that we have to call a thing, and sort of call this moment out so that we can really understand what it means to move our city, not just forward, but deeper into intention, which is important here. And so for me, I come to this story as someone born sort of after the fact. So it was, I think my grandmother was one of the original plaintiffs. Like her name was lifted up earlier, thank you so much. So Mary Crockett is my grandmother. And I didn't really understand what would lead her to stand next to Sister Tallulah Morgan and all these really brave and courageous Black parents that dared to sue the school committee. Until I didn't really understand the fullness of that until last year. Actually, last year in August, I went to West Virginia, which is where my family is originally from. So my family comes to Boston in the 1950s, 1956 or so. I come from coal mining Black people in the hills of West Virginia and Excelsior. And so last year I had the chance to go there for the very first time and to kind of see this community that has been completely devastated and empty. But what I learned was that this really sort of struggling population of folks were so committed to educating their children and to really getting people out of the mines and into service and into education, that they really put education first. So I spent some time in the archive kind of looking at the segregated high school that my grandmother went to, Excelsior High School. And I learned about the fact that that school was desegregated in 1965. That all the little Black people, including my grandmother's sisters and brothers, left Excelsior High School in 1965 and went to the white high school, Big Creek, in 1966. So by looking through records and looking through the yearbook, I was able to kind of understand how that very peaceful, easy integration of 140 Black students, that were mostly my aunts and uncles, went to this school. And I could understand what my grandmother had experienced and imagined in my mind what she had imagined for the fall of 1974. Something peaceful, something easy, something about integrating resources and families for the higher good of children in a community. Can you imagine? Wouldn't that have been nice in Boston about 6 or 7 years later? But that's not what we got here in the Great North. And so it was a revelation to me to understand that in this very segregated rural town that my family came from in West Virginia, that they had experienced the future in 1966. And that in some ways my grandmother had hoped to bring that to Boston in 1974, but we failed. We failed our children. We failed the plaintiffs. We failed Black women that dared to have more and to be more. And so if anything, I do feel like my own work and my desire to sort of carry forward is just trying to bring into fruition a multi-generational dream of more and demanding more, because my grandmother set that in place for me and hopefully so many other young people too.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to acknowledge, of course, that my co-moderator, Dr. Rivera, has been an activist, a participant, knows this history well through those lenses. So I wondered if you could say a little, too, about how you come to this history and how you're thinking about it today.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for organizing this event. It's really an honor to be on this distinguished panel. I just, did want to share that, I was a school committee member appointed by Marty Walsh and also did serve Mayor Kim Janey for a few months, and so I resigned in 2021. But I served also as the co-chair of the English Language Learners Task Force with Suzanne Lee, and during that time period, really having served basically during the worst time ever, or some of the worst times ever, during COVID, during the murder of George Floyd, and attempts to make the school district an anti-racist school district. And just the pushback from, the bullying, the racism, the threats, the death threats that I received and others on the school committee, and this is, we're talking, now, 2021, when we're trying to desegregate the exam schools. And so this is I think, a challenge that persists because this history of desegregation and the struggle for educational justice was not only for Black and white students and their families, but also for Latinx and Asian communities. And this is also what I'm hoping we can go deeper into that history of that present, right, the present day, and also, right, that connection, the past to the present. So I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about how do we build, solidarity across, race, class, ethnicity, and language. And those are just a couple of thoughts that I just wanted to bring to the table. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing. And our plan now is that Dr. Rivera and I are going to trade questions. We're going to move from the history to the present and back because we see these things as connected. And I know we're starting a little later, so we're going to go until Dr. Edozie tells us it's time for questions. And my first question picks up on something that Mayor Janey pointed to, which is that, first off, we know our narratives of the past are political, they are contested. And secondly, that when we look at this history, there has been a privileging of certain voices and a silencing or a marginalizing of others. You heard Mayor Janey uplift and center the voices, the experiences, the activism of Black women in particular. And so I wanted to ask all of our panelists to think about, as we tell these stories now, whose stories should we be telling? Where do we need to look for those stories that haven't been told, as Dr. Rivera just mentioned? And maybe if there's an example that comes to mind or something that's come out of the work you're doing, what that is and how we're thinking about sharing those stories so that that narrative of the past helps inform what we're doing in the present.
I'm going to jump in. Is this on? Can you hear me? Over the years, I've reflected on my own experiences being bused, and sometimes I've struggled with reconciling this feeling of failure that you talked about, Carolyn, with my deep love and gratitude for those who are on the front lines doing that work. And so I think the first thing I would do is offer some gentle pushback here on we failed when talking about your grandmother. And it's because I guess I've come to realize that the disconnect isn't in the work that they were striving for and the protection of Black kids and advocating for us, but it was more, was this the right approach? I don't know anyone, as I've studied this, as I've talked to folks who were there, who said, oh yes, let's bus people around the city without a real educational plan. That might have been the quickest thing to address Boston's lack of response in dealing with the Racial Imbalance Act from 1965, let alone Board versus Board of Education in '54. But the women who were on the front, the parents, not just women, who were on the front lines doing this work, I believe with every fiber of my being, were doing God's work. And how dare I sit in judgment of the people who were fighting for me as a little kid, whether my parents agreed with busing or not. What I also came to realize is that the organizing work that was happening then wasn't just about the parents who went to the NAACP, filed a lawsuit, and got this Garrity order. There were parents who were doing this work, and this independent school movement that I kind of referenced briefly with my own experience attending New School for Children, I believe is a big piece of this work that doesn't get any attention because we're always talking about yellow buses and white flight. What we're not centering are the Black parents who were doing that work. And to me, again, I think they were doing God's work. So I just, yeah, we can clap for that. Was that my mama? Oh no, she's got the phone. She comes with me so she can start the clapping off. That's what she does. Anyway, I just, the women, the parents who were on the front lines doing that work, and then your other question was whose stories need to be lifted up. I try my darndest to center those stories and to lift those women up, because I think it's what's not told as we talk about white flight, as we talk about how white neighborhoods reacted and white parents reacted. It's in all of the video clips that we all look back at this time. And it's ugly, yes, but that's not the full story. You have to dig deep and hard to find, like Ruth Batson on tape and what she was saying, or anyone else back then. And so I just believe certainly we need to be lifting up those stories. But I would also say, I think it's important to also lift up the stories of people who resisted. For the families who fled Boston, where are they now? What's their reflection of this time? Are we better off? Are we worse off? Would they have made a different decision or not? I think this is important history, and that this is American history. This isn't just something that was happening between South Boston and Roxbury or Charlestown in the South End. This is American history, and so I think lifting up all of those stories is really important.
No, I appreciate the comment and the chance to just go a little bit deeper into thinking about what is the outcome, what do we sit with on the other side of this history. And I could not agree with you more that the work of the women, the folks at the front line is so important, would never want to minimize that. I do stand behind the idea that we have failed to deliver on their dream, their intention, their resolve of these movements. Yep. And we have failed over and over again when we had the chance to do different and do better, whether it was around Beberg or redlining or all the disinvestment that we failed to do in our neighborhoods that bring true racial integration. Even if we want to talk about the MBTA Community Acts right now, communities continue to resist what it means to be racially integrated. Maybe we're saying that's not important anymore. The schools are just one arena for this, but it feels like, and as you say, if this is about American history, which it absolutely is, our dogged refusal to do right by all the people in our country and to share resources in a real way is what this conversation is truly about. And so that's where we fail to show up and do the thing that we know we can do. And I begin to feel that it is no longer within our generational desire for racial integration in this country. And maybe that's the case. Maybe we can find another way to do it, but let's call it out if that's where we are. And so for me, this story about civil rights, around desegregation in Boston, around the country, is a litmus test, is a historical litmus test for our moral character in terms of what it actually means to share resources and space in a real way. We have not gotten that right in 2024, yet we can have the 50th anniversary, the 100th, the 200th, and we still are, as you say, moving the chairs around on the deck of the Titanic. And so when are we gonna get beyond that is the real question, and then how many generations of young people have to suffer and be harmed by our refusal is the key question for me.
Thanks. I want to lift up this quote from a lot of us have heard from about Ruth Batson recently, and we're going to read it. Not far from here, the McCormick School has been renamed after Ruth Batson, who is a key leader that people have lifted up in the 1960s. And Kim referred to her, we all refer to her, but let me just read what she said. When we fight about education, we're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for what that education will give us. We're fighting for a job. We're fighting to eat. We're fighting to pay our medical bills. We're fighting for a lot of things. So this is a total fight with us. There's so many things to talk about and people to lift up, and the trauma that students went through who went to those schools, and we heard from Christine and Leola, and we want to lift up more of those voices and more of the stories of teachers, stories of bus drivers that Nick has been involved in lifting up, stories of school nurses. There's so many stories to lift up. Our three themes in the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative are what happened, lesson learned, and what next for BPS. And the biggest challenge is the what next for BPS. And people like Suzanne and Lorna are thinking and crafting thoughts about what that should mean. And a lot of us have to get together with them and behind them and others about that next chapter for BPS, because we don't want to just commemorate. If the whole worth of this is if we can do something for the children now in the schools to create more opportunity for them and those children to succeed in them. So that's what I think we want to be about.
Okay, so thank you. So this question is really about a little going into the what's next, because these lectures will continue. So I wanted to ask all of the panelists, given the current national and the local political battles, we even have, for example, white supremacists serving on school boards and all these attacks on affirmative action, banning books, banning DEI. What do you see as some of the future challenges and opportunities for advancing racial equity in public schools? What's next? Dr. Crockett, you want to go first?
Thanks, Lorna. Thanks for the question. What came up first for me is reparations, actually. We have struggled with this conversation around reparations in HR 40 in a real way. And so if the conversation for me, and as I mentioned a minute ago, it is about kind of what are we going to do, what are we doing to meet the moment of resource and space sharing? It is not just about a program, it is not just about a policy or a school. It's about a whole fundamental reshift of the way that we organize ourselves and understand it. And until we have a much more serious conversation about reparations across the Americas, then we are delusional. I think if we think it's about a classroom. There's just something very fundamental that your question raises in terms of how we are organized politically, economically, socially. Education is about, I think it's about cultivating genius. It's about allowing the gifts, the vision of a young person in that community to be brought forward. And so that is what education is about. And we are no way set up for that in our public education system right now. So much of our best learning, and I think the mayor can speak to this too, has happened at home and outside of school by activists, by people who know what education can and should be. Many of the people who are in this room that I look to as tremendous heroes, I know that have been my mentors and sheroes and all these people, it had nothing to do with what was going on in school. So one, I'm wondering, how do we really rethink what is happening in school? And then how do we fundamentally step into a shift around understanding how people get what they are owed? And so reparations is a real way to have that conversation. And I'm sorry that in this country we are so behind in having a real full-throated discussion there. I'm grateful that we do have a reparations task force in the city of Boston, but so much of the learning about what can and should happen is happening in Costa Rica, is happening in Colombia, is happening in the South.
I'll just echo, co-sign everything that Dr. Crockett just said. And when we think about the word reparations, you know, at its root is to repair the harm. And it's something that we refuse to deal with in this country. And I think until we do have this radical shift, we will keep spinning our wheels and moving the chairs around on the Titanic. In this current state of where we are, it's hard to see that path forward. You know, it seems we are going backwards. And every time, I mean, this is a history, this is a pattern in our country. Every time there is some sort of progress, we are going to have the backlash. So emancipation comes, and here comes Jim Crow, right after Reconstruction. We get our first black president, and then we get that. And then here we are, debating. This is a presidential election year, and there are questions about what direction we want to go in. We're torn, we're confused. How can that be? How can that be in a land that professes, that this is the land of opportunity, put down your tie, whatever the quote is around, put down your bags and give me your weary and you're tired. Like, what? What are we doing? And so I worry deeply that people are happy with this. This chaos allows, that's the distraction. It's the red herring over there. Meanwhile, folks are over here stacking their money and building spaceships when they mess this planet up where they're going next. And it's really scary. And to some of the earlier points, are we educating our children appropriately? Learning cursive is the least of it. Like, how are we helping our kids understand the complexity around what is happening to them and to think critically about these issues and their role and voice in helping to shift and change these things? And I think, there are many people who are in power who are happy that folks are over here thinking about something else or on their TikToks or worrying about China. Whatever the worry is, it's all a distraction to keep us preoccupied from what is right in front of us. You would think in a country like the United States that we would do just what you're saying, that we would think about how we share these resources, how we help people become producers of jobs and other resources that we have. And instead, we just have this scarcity mindset. And it really makes you question, is democracy the thing we care about in this nation? Or is it supremacy? And I think it's clear, what people care about in this country. Anyway.
There's a lot of barriers we face. There were over 4,000 kids who come to the Boston Public Schools every day who are homeless. There's the thousands of refugees who are now entering the Boston Public Schools. There's the way the system has been divided up, that how many students are going to charter schools now, how many students are going to Medco and parochial schools. So there are those barriers. There's a big barrier with housing and gentrification. 4 times as many black people have bought houses in Brockton in the last 5 years as have been able to buy houses in Boston, even though Boston is 7 times the size of Brockton. So we need a housing bond bill, we need rent control, and we have to come back to, I think, the racial wealth gap. A lot of people, more people are familiar with the number $8. The study that said that's the racial wealth of African Americans. Carolyn is trying to do a lot of work to where do we go from here? And I want to also credit Dr. Rivera and the Gaston Institute. There's a new number, $39,921. $39,921 is the gap between whites and Latino in median income in this state. We have the highest gap between whites and Latinos of any state in the country. So those numbers, $8 and $39,921 that you lifted up, are ones we have to lift up, and then lift up with policy changes and legislation and budget appropriations if we're going to change this picture. And it also means that we got to look beyond Boston. The gateway cities have all of these challenges. Sometimes I think they have more challenges because they don't have some of the major institutions that we have here in healthcare and universities and employment. But we need to find ways to also to unite the gateway cities in Boston in these efforts for change.
So Dr. Dozy has pointed that we want to move to some questions. I want to ask one final one of our panelists, if I may, because this is something we talked about in some of our email exchanges, and I wouldn't want to let it go. And this is a question about how we get organized. And I wanted to preface it by saying there are some great historical examples, including Dr. Crockett's book, of coalitions in the past. If you don't know it, People Before Highways, know it, find it. It's a phenomenal book. But I did want to think, we face a lot of challenges. We have to get organized. In the past or in the present, where are you finding those possibilities for organizing? Where are you looking to them? I will say for my part very quickly, 3 weeks ago we had the Boston Labor Conference. Lou was there because he is everywhere. And we had 3 presentations from teacher unions across the state, all talking about how they needed to work on housing justice, how they needed to connect with communities and families, how they needed to advocate for racial justice. Teacher unions have a long and complicated past, as I'm sure many in this room know, but that would not have been the case in that room even a decade ago. And so to see these kinds of new organizing among that group was one place where I'm drawing some inspiration and some hope amidst these challenges we face. And I'm curious where you all in the past or the present are thinking about solidarity, and then we will shift to questions, I promise.
Well, I'll go because it's going to be quick. It's to my left and to my right.
Yes.
Is my inspiration. You know, we can clap for Lou and for Carolyn. And the work that they are doing to lift up this history and to build even beyond, you know, this history. And it is that coalition work that goes beyond education for sure. I, you know, am blessed in my day job that we tackle these issues and we understand the interconnectedness of these issues. And so as we're trying to help people climb the economic ladder, you can't do so if education's not working, if you have some other instability. And so my inspiration is from Lou and for Carolyn and for the number of organizers in our city. You know, Boston's known for the eds and the meds, but the other thing Boston is known for is this is a city that's going to fight, it's going to organize, it's going to, you know, put forth its ideals and try to actualize them in a way. So I'm really grateful for your leadership. Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you.
Obviously I'm proud to have worked with so many people over the last 53 years I've been doing it and what the difference it made for them to be involved. I think the biggest magnitude of change, at least I've been involved in during that time, has happened in the last 10 years with a coalition called Raise Up Massachusetts. In 2012, there was a proposal made by unions and community groups and religious groups to raise taxes on wealthy people and spend the money on education and human services. 800 people came to the State House in a daytime hearing, and 2 weeks later, the Speaker and Senate President had a press conference and said, no, we're not going to do it. And they had the power to say no, and that was it. So we had to really kind of dig deep. And the Raise Up Mass Coalition was formed, and from the beginning we said, we have to do this by referendums. We can file legislation, but either it won't pass or a very watered down version will pass. But if we can get the signatures to put it on the ballot, which is no small task, you have to get 150,000 signatures in very short time periods, then you can go directly to the people. And in 2014, we raised the minimum wage. We passed earned sick days for 900,000 people who didn't have them. 2018, we raised the minimum wage again. We passed paid family medical leave, which benefits almost every person in the state. And last year, 2022, we passed the millionaire's tax, which is putting $1.3 billion. So all that was done by organizing and that broad coalition. It's not enough. You can't do referendums on every single issue that has to be done. And hopefully Raise Up Mass is looking at other referendum campaigns. But that's something hopeful and big. And the other part of it is everyone can contribute in a signature campaign. There's so many ways to contribute. Everyone who brings the petition to work, to brings it to their school meeting, to stands out in front of a supermarket for 2 hours to collect signatures. There's so many ways people can be heroes and heroines to put that together, and that's what leads to that change. So that's made me hopeful, and we just need to keep doing it, but also work in other areas, because that, again, you can't do a referendum about every single issue that needs addressing.
I would say one thing on the housing point is I think we have to get serious about taking housing out of the speculative market.
Yes.
Yeah. It is possible to think of housing beyond a commodity, to think of housing as a right. And if we were to really wrap ourselves around that in terms of policy and in terms of vision, we could make so much possible. just the strength of land trusts, the strength of limited equity co-ops, all of these other kinds of housing models that come out of this kind of 1960s moment are instructive. I have to shout out and salute Mayor Janey for her work to make the buses free. Absolutely revelatory work that continues and needs to be expanded. Ways that we think about our basic everyday needs, transportation, housing. I'm going to say another one, food. Can you imagine if food was free? Why are we paying for this? What are the ways that we are trying to make our environments more livable? All of these things compromise our ability to achieve not just racial equity, but health. We had a competition with a group of graduate students I work with at MIT, and we asked young people across the city in a social media challenge, what is wealth to you? We shared some of this data from the Federal Reserve's study on the racial wealth gap, and we said to the young people, economists say this, economists say that, what do you say? Over and over again, the young people from high schools in the city and outside of the city said that wealth for them was happiness and security. How radical that they took us back to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, these documents, and made them real, but talked about the fact that for them it was about feeling safe and feeling connected. We know that, but we do not legislate that way. We do not act that way. How can we live our values through what we're saying to keep each other safe and well? And so for me, we have gotten so confused along the way of so-called advanced capitalism that it has robbed us of our ability to live well. And so fundamentally, that has got to be what we claim back. And I do want to shout out a couple people who are here. I want to shout out Fran Smith, Suzanne Lee, Pamela King, Jemediah Kamari, Tony Menelik, because these people have been so foundational for me, and I just really want to appreciate y'all, because the vision for what we need is here, but also even historically on the point I think about the Freedom Stay Out movement, the Stay Out schools in 64 and 65, young people again coming together to talk about what they wanted schools to be like before forced busing happened, and what they offered us were a series of visions, dreams, and intentions, as I would call, for what school could be for Black and white children coming together at St. Mark's and Roxbury, creating their own curriculum, sort of putting the pieces together. So either we talk about now or historically, we have got to get back to a deeper sense of what people really want, and it's not about money. We need some money, but we need much more than money, and I think it's possible.
I suppose we have about 5 minutes for questions. Yes, if you could be brief, please. I've got 1, 2. No, hold on for the mic. I got it, Nick. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kenzie Urbano, and I am a student in Nick Jerovich's class. And right along the lines of what you were speaking on, Carolyn, is exactly where I was going to take my question. I was thinking about reparations, and what I hear when I hear reparations is I hear underfunded communities. And so from there I was thinking, like, we talk a lot in class that social welfare is kind of centered in schools these days, that overworked and overburdened educators and school and guidance social workers kind of have to try to provide welfare for children. And so I was thinking about where we direct resources when we think of reparations, and like schools as like the center of recreation, community events, and sharing spaces. So I guess long story short is, if you think about like BPS as these centers, how could you like cultivate and distribute resources and networks beyond capital investment? And which resources would you privilege, and where would you like to see them going?
Let's take one more question.
Okay,
Yes.
my question is this. Does anybody know how segregation got started, and why did it get started? To my understanding is it got started because of Section 8. People in the community was asked if they would like to move in a house when they lived in the projects. The question came around to different people that didn't live directly in the community. So that by them offering Section 8 to people that lived in the projects is why busing got approved. Then Proposition 2.5 kicked in. Why did that take away the amount of rent that we pay monthly? We need to look into that and find out why did that happen. Because of Proposition 2.5 is why our rent is so high. As far as school coming here, UMass Boston is supposed to be a community college. Our kids can't afford to come here. We're not supposed to even have dorms on these things. They took away the whole mission statement from this college. As staff employees, we don't get a raise every year. We get one every 3 years. We are very disappointed with the state and the city because as human beings who work here every single day, we feel totally neglected.
Thank you. Last round of brief answers, please.
I'll try to jump in, but I'm going to ask Dr. Crockett, to the historian. Part of your question was asking about how did segregation get started. Here in this country, it certainly predates Section 8, so I'm not sure the housing piece that you were pulling together there, we've been segregated since we've been here. And what's interesting, in other places around the world, particularly in places where Black people are the dominant culture and people, like this whole thing around white people, Black people, it's just not a thing. Like, people are just people. But here in this country, certainly since Black people were brought to the Americas, the first Africans in 1600s, there has been this notion to keep people separated and in their place. Not just separated, but in their place. So I think it does predate Section 8, but I look to the historians in the room to add a little more background to that.
Thank you. If we could wrap it up.
Well,
Yes, go ahead, Lou.
so much of the solutions go back to housing and education, and we have so much to do in each. But the things are out there, what to do to pass more funding, like the pending housing bond bill, other policy of the city. Unless we pass rent control, we'll never get on top of it, and probably the legislature will not pass that. It'll only pass if it's taken to a referendum in 2 or 3 years. And obviously, we've talked a lot about education. So there's a lot to do, and thank you for gathering us, and thanks for the questions people asked as well.
And I did want to ask Dr. Rivera if you wanted to chime in about some of the work happening on our campus, especially
if I could just make a plug.
Question.
We are so honored here at UMass Boston to be partnering with the new Ruth Batson Academy, which is the BCLA McCormick, the merger of the school, and just the incredible leader that she was, what she represents, her vision. I mean, this idea of creating a community school here in our peninsula and the whole history of Columbia Point, the possibilities are just endless, right? So we need all of you to guide, and help and really contribute to this process. But we're really excited about that. And part of it too is we want to advance ethnic studies, because I think that's also another solution, right? If we knew this history, if we were taught this history and the history of all of our communities, there would be less conflict. And we know why we would need reparations. But anyway, so I just wanted to make that plug that this is a historic moment also for UMass Boston to, really step up and put, into action what our mission is around anti-racism and health promotion. So thank you for letting me put that plug out there for the Ruth Batson Academy.
Thank you so much.
And I just want to make one quick plug for anyone that wants to continue this conversation. We are having a Hacking the Racial Wealth Gap hackathon at MIT on May 4th, where we think about the 50 years of education justice organizing in the city of Boston, and we connect that with local nonprofits and faith-based leaders who have questions about the future and who are trying to plan. So come, join the hackathon with us, hack all day. The first prize is $1,000. We need people who can think hard and are ready to think about the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Professor Nick Jurovich, thank you so much. Professor Lorna Rivera, thank you so much as well. The Honorable Mayor, thank you. And Lou Finfer, thank you. And Carolyn Crockett, thank you so much. Thank you to all. A great conversation, and the conversation continues. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are now going to move into our final part of the program. And I'm going to call up, on behalf of Director Lemmy, Professor Michael Johnson. I'm going to call up Amrit Prabhu and the student committee. Peggy Wood, if you could please come up with us as we confer the student award. This is Olivia. Okay, over here. Be careful coming up. Yep. Yep.
If I have a little hand on the lectern, it's easier.
I would also like to invite Olivia Dannenberg, just right there. I won't move you up in a minute.
Is this Olivia?
No. Olivia's over here. Okay, so who would like to make comments first?
All right. I'll say a few things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be representing the Wood family in making this award for our new intern. There is a summer program for it and a part of the winter program. What we have noticed most or thought about is here is a person who has already been working with the Wakefield Human Rights Commission. She has some of the experience of working with people and knows what that's, a little bit about what that's about. But she will bring now to her work with people, under the guidance of Kaylin and Lou, she will bring study and scholarship. And this will help us not only do the work, but perhaps understand it better and understand how to make it better.
Thank you, Peggy.
I'm very pleased.
Thank you, Peggy. Professor Michael Johnson will just say a few words about the recipient of this award, Olivia Dannenberg.
Yes. Olivia Dannenberg is a junior majoring in labor studies from Wakefield and an alumna of Wakefield High School. She serves as a student worker in the Labor Resource Center and a co-convener of the UMass Boston Labor Club. She actively engages in promoting labor advocacy on campus, and she's actively involved with mentorship and empowerment of young girls in Boston public schools through the Strong Women, Strong Girls program since 2018. Moreover, she has enriched her understanding of public history and public education programs at the Lawrence History Center in Lawrence, Massachusetts this past summer. Her academic pursuits at UMass Boston include studying the history of school desegregation and creating fair and equitable spaces, reflecting her commitment to social movements. And we're happy to award the 2024 inaugural Robert C. Wood Internship Award in Public and Urban Affairs to Olivia Dannenberg.
Olivia has said that she would like to say some. Okay. Then that's fine. That's fine. Congratulations, Olivia.
If someone turns down the chance to speak.
We're going to train her. All right. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you so much. All right. And so I'm going to call up Marcy Manningham to provide the closing comments, but before I do so, we have some gifts to give to the keynotes today. So, Marcy, do you have the gifts? We'll just give those gifts and then you can make the closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, the Honorable Mayor is taking a rest break, so I will confer the first gift to Lou Finfer. And I just want to say something about these gifts. These bags are actually the product of a student at the McCormick School who has formed a sustainable business and entrepreneurial effort. What she does is that she recreates and upscales textiles, turns them into bags, so that we avoid using plastics for our bags. And she's outside right now selling her wares, and we bought about 25 of them to provide as gifts to our guests today. Inside, of course, is our Boston bragging, you know, everything about UMass Boston is inside, but the bags are really special. So, Lou Finfer, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you. We have a gift for Carolyn Crockett. Again, these bags are, you know, a classic and a production of students at UMass Boston. Thank you, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your voice and for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. The mayor is back. We have one for you. I hope you heard my story about, you know, the special bags and the student who handmade them. Thank you, Honorable Mayor. Thank you so much for your participation. Thanks for doing this. Excellent. I have one for Nick Jurovich. Absolutely. Nick, it's been a blessing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. And one for Lorna Rivera. Thank you. Thank you, Lorna. And one for Peggy. Peggy, should we bring that over to you? Yes, absolutely. One for Peggy. I'll bring that over to you. All right, to close out, I'd like to introduce Marcy Manningham. As the director said earlier, she was the chair last year. I had big boots to fill, and I don't know if I succeeded, but you know, it's my joy to welcome Marcy up here to give closing remarks to this ceremony.
All right, y'all, this is when we all need to stand up and do this, you know. Come on, let's, you know, I'm still, where's Mayor Jan? I'm still thinking of that Jackson 5. But coming from Michigan, as Mary and I'm thinking of the Jackson 5, you know. We get down, we get down, we get down. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. The discussion, I think, that we have had is one that's been going on in this country since the first Reconstruction. Reverend William Barber III talks about the need and the challenge facing us to engage in a third Reconstruction. Now, I don't know if you all know what that means, but Reverend Barber is part of the Poor People's Campaign and does a lot around the interrelated issues of social justice, poverty, race, schooling, housing, the whole deal. As someone who worked directly with Bob Wood on the Boston School Desegregation Project and was involved with the case, I want to lift up especially Kim Janey and Phyllis Janey, because you were both part of an era when we did the reorganization. I had the honor and privilege of drafting a reorganization plan that was about structure, that was finally approved by the court, and it led to the achievement of the court-ordered goals in the administrative category, and Cliff Janey was one of the people that we appointed as district superintendent in Area B. I say that because we today have been talking about community and courts as if they are opposite. But the courts exist because of the community, and the community exists because of, in English common law, the courts. This nation was founded on some very simple propositions: that we were entitled, we the people, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we are still engaged in that struggle. The first Reconstruction was about building that nation from those truths. The Constitution of Massachusetts, which was created in 1780, actually was ratified, contained a preamble and a Bill of Rights. And the Massachusetts Constitution itself was based on the Iroquois Convention, which was a configuration of 5 indigenous tribes that came together to identify core truths and how power might be separated so that e pluribus unum could exist without people killing each other and tearing each other apart. So even before the Pilgrims landed on these shores, and John Winthrop gave his sermon called A Model of Christian Charity, in which he drew on the book of Matthew, referring to, and we shall be like a city on a hill, referring to New England. We have been engaged in this process of construction and reconstruction. After the Civil War, there was Reconstruction too. And that led, as many know, to a set of policies that were completely antithetical to whatever founding truths we had to rely on. And yet another Reconstruction occurred in the 50s with respect to Brown versus Board of Education and the struggles of black parents, black children throughout the country to live up to the notion of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. I want to push back on 2 things that I think will lend some context, because that very struggle was going on in Massachusetts. There was a man named Prince Hall who founded the first black school in Boston in, I think it was 1798, 1800. He founded that school in his house. Prince Hall is known for starting the first chapter of Black Masons. He had to go to London to get that authorization because Massachusetts Masons were, the Freemasonry movement wasn't allowing that. Prince Hall was a separatist. He inspired others as well. William Monroe Trotter, for whom we have the Trotter Institute, was a separatist. He believed in separate but equal. Others as well. Booker T. Washington did not. Booker T. Washington and Monroe Trotter were arguing with each other all the time over this very question, separate but equal. The belief that it's better for our own to be educated by our own versus integrated in whatever way that means, however that happens, is a tension that has existed going back to the 1600s, I'm here to tell you. I'm also here to tell you, as someone who was a dear friend of James Breeden, who, with his Dartmouth roommate, Noel Day, founded the Freedom Schools movement with Ruth Batson. I want to hold up Sarah Ann Shaw, whose homegoing is this Saturday at the church where I worship, Bethel AME Church. Were part of an early generation, but really standing on the shoulders of a previous set of generations going back to the 1800s. After the 1850 decision by Justice Lemuel Shaw to reject what was happening in Massachusetts, I just want to go back a little bit and go forward, because it's important, I think, to get the history right so that we really understand what we're dealing with. I'm sort of trying to help us zoom out. I'm going to finish fast as I can. I'm making it up here, folks. But in looking at what happened in that point of time, the Massachusetts state legislature passed a law in 1845 banning segregation. It called for the integration of public schools. It was thrown out by Justice Shaw, and that case was brought, as Mayor Janey correctly pointed out, by Benjamin Roberts on behalf of his daughter Sarah. But the case was argued by 3 attorneys, one of whom was William Cooper Nell. Another was Robert Morris, both black men, and Charles Sumner, for whom the Sumner Tunnel was named. That case, they represented the clients. A previous case had been argued in Salem and Nantucket. There were 3 towns, Boston, Salem, Nantucket. Why? Because whaling was more amenable to black people. You could work on a boat and be taken seriously if you were away for a year. And so there's a whole history there, and I want to shout out to UMass Boston, because that history is here in the archives. It's right here. I don't have the citation. It's over on the messy table. But what happened in 1845 was that law was passed. It was shot down. The Roberts decision was shot down by Justice Shaw. I know some of his descendants, by the way. But you know what happened? Lemuel Shaw was the justice. Black parents and black children and black mothers were not content to let it go. They went to the legislature. They did, where's Lou? Is Lou in the bathroom? There's Lou. They organized. They put pressure on the legislature. It went from the legislature to the court and back to the legislature again, folks, between 1850 and 1855. This is before the Civil War. And you know what happened? A law was passed in 1855 in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, 1855, outlawing discrimination and segregation, making the Commonwealth of Massachusetts the first state in the Union to have a policy calling for integration. And you're correct. Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, what Prince Hall, what Monroe Trotter wanted, what many black parents in Boston wanted in the more recent times, became the law of the land until Brown. But in Boston, that was not the case. However, there was opposition. So anyway, the story continues. I'm getting the signal from Kiki. It goes on, but let me bring it back to Bob Wood, who is one of my dear mentors, and the family, I love them dearly. In 1968, he gave a talk at Faneuil Hall on urban independence. That was a summer of chaos, and it is a coincidence that in the summer of '68 in Chicago, all hell broke loose at the Democratic Convention. I remember that. I was in high school. No, I was in college. We're likely to see that again. We're likely to see that chaos this year. But one of the things that Bob said in that talk, and Peggy was with him, 1968, they were coming back from Washington, is that problems, he raised the context that problems could not be reduced to a single cause, that they really were connected. And he knew that the question to ask was, what are we going to do to change things, to make things different? The question he asked is If our evolving heritage has served us well, Bob said, certain important adjustments are still in order for the nation to march to the drumbeats of the present. Now, my question for us all as we move forward is, what are those adjustments? What are those adjustments in terms of ideas? I'm totally with Professor Crockett in terms of how we sort of lift this up to the plane of values in public life, because unless we understand the moral framework of knowledge is power, unless we understand what wise stewardship means across the different policy levels, across state government, across different domains, then we will never be able to figure out creative solutions to how we really are able to create and maintain a system of education that lives up to those ideals, that emerges from the community rather than the courts. There's a whole story I could tell you about Judge Garrity's, why it was busing, there's a whole history there. But it's our task. And it's not a surprise to me today that as we sit here, there's a former president sitting in a courtroom in New York City. Okay? So the courts are not supposed to be the public managers of public life. They're the guardians. It is our task to understand how we translate our cherished ideals into policies, structures, practices, and partnerships that sustain us, not just in the immediate time, but looking forward to, like, even as we celebrate the nation's birth in 2 years, or the city of Boston's, also where I live now, Watertown, 400th birthday in 2030, how we might truly become that city on a hill, or beloved community in the words of Dr. King. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for carrying on the work, and may we all take inspiration from the shoulders we stand on. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy, for those words of wisdom. I'd just like to end finally by thanking some people I didn't thank in my opening remarks. Those are the facilities, Clarissa Chose, John Jessup, Charlotte Namby, Gifty DeBorders Jackson, the Robert C. Wood Committee and volunteers, our participants today, our keynote speakers, and you, the audiences. Thank you so much for making this event really a critical discussion for a critical, important issue. Go well, and thank you again.